The doors banged open at 1 a.m, and the gurney came through them like a thing thrown, and for the first few seconds I did not know it was my sister. That is the truth I keep going back to. I knew there was a woman on the board, 37 years old, a restrained driver pulled from a single vehicle collision on the interstate, hypotensive, tachycardic, her belly rigid under the medic's gloved hand. I knew she was dying in the slow, organized way that gives you a few minutes if you do not waste them. I did not know she was mine. "Talk to me, Hector," I said, and the medic talked. 37, female, restrained driver, single car into the median. Found unresponsive, came up combative on scene, pressures 80/40 and dropping, heart rate 130, bellies distended and tight. 2 large bore lines, a liter of saline in, she's still soft. I had my hands on her before I had her face. That is how the work goes. You meet the body first. The body does not lie to you, and the body does not care who you are. I called for the massive transfusion protocol, and I called for the surgeon on call, and Bridget already had the rapid infuser primed, because Bridget had been doing this longer than I had, and she could read a room the way I read a chart. Kevin, my resident, was at the head of the bed with the airway kit, looking at me the way residents look at you when they want to be told the plan out loud so the fear has somewhere to go. "She's protecting for now," I said. "We bag if she drops her pressure or her SATs. Type and cross, get me the fast probe, and somebody get the operating room on the phone. She's bleeding into her abdomen and she is going upstairs." It was a clean resuscitation. I want to say that plainly because everything that came after was so far from clean. For about 90 seconds, it was just the room and the body and the orders. The choreography I had spent my whole adult life learning, and I was good at it. And the woman on the table was alive because of the order the orders came in. Then I looked at her face. I have tried to describe what that was like to exactly 2 people, and I have failed both times. The closest I can come is this. You know the feeling of stepping off a curb you did not know was there, the lurch when the ground arrives later than your body expected? It was that, except it did not stop. The floor kept arriving late. The face under the oxygen mask, slack and gray and wrong, was Maurice's face. My sister's face. Older than the last time I had seen it, which had been across a parking lot 4 years before, but hers. I did not stop moving. I want that on the record, too. My hands kept doing the thing my hands knew, and my mouth kept saying the numbers. And some cold, competent part of me that I have never been more grateful for took the rest of me by the collar and held it against the wall while the work got done. It was when I straightened to call the blood that I saw them. They were pressed against the far wall of the bay, just inside the curtain, where a sheriff's deputy must have walked them in from whatever car had followed the ambulance. My mother and my father, Eileen and Gregory Brandt, 63 and 66, in the clothes you grab at midnight when the phone rings wrong. My mother had both hands wrapped around my father's forearm, and she was gripping it so hard that the next day there would be 4 small bruises in a row above his wrist, the shape of her fingers, the only mark anyone in my family left on anyone else that night. She was staring at me, not at Marisa, at me. Her mouth was open and nothing was coming out of it except, finally, in a voice too small for the room, That's not. That is not. She could not finish it. That is not, Nora. That is not the dropout. That is not the daughter we put outside the family because the other one told us a story and we liked the story. That is not the liar. That cannot be the liar because the liar is standing at the head of the bed with the dying daughter's life in her hands. And she is the only thing in this room that knows what to do. I held her eyes for exactly 1 second. I have thought about that second more than I have thought about almost anything. Then I turned back to my sister because my sister was the patient and my mother was not, and I said, "Hang the blood. Let's go." And the room obeyed. The woman my family had spent 5 years swearing was a fraud. The thing nobody tells you about being proven right is how little it feels like winning. I had imagined a version of that moment for years, in the ungenerous way you imagine things at 2 a.m. when sleep will not come. In the imagined version, there was a speech. There was a turn, a line, a face going pale at exactly the right time. What there actually was, when it came, was a distended abdomen and a falling pressure, and my own 2 hands. And underneath the fear on my mother's face, I could already see the arithmetic starting. The slow, horrible math of a person realizing the wall they built was made out of nothing, and that they had skipped a graduation and a wedding to stand behind it. I sent Marisa up to the operating room 4 minutes later. I gave the report to Ruth Okafor myself, our chief of surgery, a woman who has forgotten more trauma than most surgeons ever learn. And Ruth listened with her gown half on and said, Good. Fast. She has a chance because you didn't dither. And then the elevator doors closed on my sister and the surgical team, and the bay was suddenly enormously quiet, the way it gets after, and I stood at the scrub sink and washed my hands and watched them. And they were not shaking. I want to tell you about the years they were not watching, because that is where the actual story lives. The trauma bay was just the night the truth caught up. The story is longer and quieter than that, and it is mostly about a life I built in rooms my family was never in. I finished medical school in the spring of 2020. I matched into emergency medicine, which is the specialty for people who would rather be ready for anything than expert in one thing. And that is exactly the kind of person I am. I did my residency at a county hospital in a city 8 hours from where I grew up, 4 years of the worst and best nights of my life, and in June of 2024, I graduated and became an attending, which means the building stops asking whether you are sure and starts assuming you are. By the night Marisa came through my doors, I had been the one they assume for almost 2 years. I was the steadiest attending on the overnight rotation. A second-year nurse told me once, not knowing I could hear, that when it got bad, she liked working under me because I never raised my voice. I have raised my voice perhaps 4 times in my career, and never at a person, only at a malfunctioning piece of equipment, which deserved it. None of that was visible to the people who raised me because they had decided, on the strength of a single sentence from my sister, that all of it was invented. I married Adam Keene in October of 2021 in a small ceremony in a friend's backyard with white lights strung between 2 oak trees and 40 people who loved us. Adam teaches high school history. He is the kind of man who remembers the name of the waiter and asks about the waiter's mother the next time, and means it. He is steady in a way that has nothing to do with money or status, which is a kind of steadiness I had never seen up close before I met him, because in my family, steadiness was always a performance you put on to impress the neighbors. The morning of the wedding, I cried in the bathroom for 10 minutes. Not because I was sad, but because there were 2 empty chairs in the second row that I had set up out of a hope I was too proud to admit I still had. My parents did not come. They were not invited in the way you invite people you expect. But they were told, and they did not come, and the chairs sat empty through the whole ceremony. And afterward, Adam's mother quietly folded them and put them away, so I would not have to look at them at the reception. I tell you about the chairs because they matter later, and because they are the truest picture I have of what those years cost. Not the dramatic things. The empty chairs, the card I mailed when I graduated residency, a small announcement with the date and the hospital's name that came back 2 weeks later, unopened. Returned to sender in my mother's handwriting on the front. The birthdays that arrived and left without a phone ringing. You can survive the big betrayals on adrenaline. It is the empty chairs that wear you down. The small, repeated proof that the people who were supposed to be in the front row had decided you were not worth the drive. I had built a whole life in the years they were not watching. It did not need an audience. It only needed to be true. That was the thing I had finally learned, somewhere in the back half of residency, on a night I cannot specifically remember because it was indistinguishable from 100 other nights. The life did not need them to witness it to be real. The patients I kept alive did not become less alive because my mother thought I was a fraud. The work was the work. Adam loved me whether or not anyone signed off on it. The truth, it turned out, did not require a quorum. People who have never done emergency medicine imagine it as a constant scream, a television version, all shouting and sprinting. It is not. The good ones make it quiet. There is a tempo you learn, a way of slowing your own heart on purpose so the room slows with you. Because panic is contagious and so is calm, and the attending sets which one the room catches. I learned that in my second year of residency from a man named Dr. Alvarez, who is the best clinician I have ever stood next to, and who told me once, during a code that was going badly, in a voice you would use to order coffee, lower. Everything you say it lower. They'll follow you down. They did. We got that patient back. I have set my voice low at the head of 1,000 beds since, and it works every time, and not one of the people I grew up with has ever seen me do it. That is the strange arithmetic of an estrangement. The years do not pause for the people who left. They kept thinking of me, if they thought of me at all, as a 26-year-old who had supposedly failed, frozen at the worst moment of the story they had agreed to tell. Meanwhile, I was becoming someone. I learned to deliver a baby in a hallway when the elevators were down. I learned to tell a husband of 40 years that his wife was gone, and to do it in a way that gave him something to hold instead of just taking everything away. I learned which of my own instincts to trust and which to check. I learned to be wrong out loud, fast, and to fix it faster. which is the actual skill, the one that separates the doctors you want from the doctors who are merely confident. I built a reputation in a building 8 hours from my mother's kitchen, and the reputation was the exact opposite of the word my family had hung on me. Reliable, the one you want when it goes bad, the steady one, and at the center of it, holding the whole structure up, was Adam. He never once asked me to prove anything. That sounds small until you have lived without it. He met me in the second year of my residency at a mutual friend's terrible dinner party, and within a month, he knew the whole story of my family, and his response to all of it was not to take up arms on my behalf or to tell me I should fight harder for them. His response was to build an ordinary, durable life with me day by day, as if my worth were simply a settled fact that needed no defending, because to him it was. "You don't owe anyone proof, Nora," he said to me once, early, when I was spiraling about a holiday I was not invited to. "You owe yourself a life. Spend the energy there." I married him in a backyard with white lights, and the two people who should have been proudest of the doctor I had become were not there, and the man who had never needed me to be a doctor at all was waiting at the end of the aisle. But I am getting ahead of the wound, and you cannot understand the trauma bay without the wound, so let me go back. It started, the way these things do, with something real that got bent. In the autumn of 2018, in the middle of the hardest year of medical school, my grandmother began to die. Her name was Joan, my father's mother, and she had effectively raised Marisa and me in the long stretches when our parents were busy being the people our parents needed everyone to think they were. Grandma Joan was the one who came to the school plays. She was the one who taught me to read a thermometer and to cut an apple into the shape of a rabbit and to keep my mouth shut and my eyes open when adults were lying. When she got sick, there was no question in my mind about where I would be. I arranged a medical leave of absence, 1 term, the kind of thing that is entirely ordinary in medical training and that the school grants without drama, and I went home and I sat with her through the last weeks. I held her hand. I managed her medications. I was, for the only time in my life, a doctor to someone I loved. Before I was technically a doctor at all, and I would not trade those weeks for anything, including the 5 years they cost me. While I was sitting up with our dying grandmother, my sister was building a different story about where I was. Marisa is 3 years older than me, and for most of our lives, she was the bright one, which is to say, she was the one our parents had decided to bet on. She started a nursing program the year I started college. She did not finish it. The details of why have shifted over the years, depending on who is telling it. But the short version is that she withdrew in her second year and never went back. And the family folded that fact up very small and put it somewhere no one would look. Because the bright one cannot have failed. That is not allowed. That breaks the whole arrangement. And then there I was, 3 years behind her, accidentally succeeding, and the contrast must have been unbearable. So when I took my leave, she found a use for it. She told them I had dropped out. She told them I had failed out of medical school and was too ashamed to admit it, and that the leave of absence was a story I was telling to cover the collapse. I know the exact shape of the lie, because my mother repeated it to me later, at the only confrontation we ever had about it, as if it were a thing I had done rather than a thing that had been done to me. "She failed out, Mom," my sister had said, by my mother's own account, sitting in my parents' kitchen with the particular tenderness she always saved for her cruelest moments. "She's too ashamed to say it. Don't make her admit it. Just let her come home and we'll take care of her." It was perfect when you look at it. It explained why I was home. It cast Marisa as the gentle protector of my dignity, which made her the good daughter twice over. And it took the one thing I had that she did not, the future, and it set it on fire in a way that left no evidence, because the absence of a diploma I had not yet earned looked exactly like the absence of a diploma I had lost. To understand how my parents swallowed it whole, you have to understand the shape of the house I grew up in, because the lie did not land on neutral ground. It landed on 30 years of preparation. From the time we were small, my parents ran the family the way you run a business, with one promising product and one product you are quietly embarrassed by. Marisa was the promising product. She was older, she was charming in the easy way that photographs well, and at some point, before I was old enough to notice, a decision had been made about which daughter the family was going to be proud of. And the decision was not me. It was never cruel in a way you could point at. There was no single moment. It was 1,000 small allocations. Marisa's recital was an event the whole family rearranged itself around. My science fair, the one I won, the regional one. My father missed because of a work thing that I later learned was a round of golf. When I got into a good college on a scholarship, my mother's response was to worry, out loud, at dinner, whether it would make Marisa, feel bad. That was the water I swam in. Every good thing I did had to be measured first against how it would make the favorite feel, and if it made her feel small, it was somehow my fault for having done the good thing. The only person in that house who looked at me straight was my grandmother. Joan did not play the game. She came to my science fair. She kept the ribbon on her refrigerator until the day she died, long after I had forgotten about it. And when I cleaned out her kitchen, I found it there, faded, held up by a magnet shaped like a strawberry. And I sat down on her linoleum floor and cried harder than I had at the actual funeral. Joan was the one who taught me to read a thermometer, who let me practice taking her blood pressure when I was 12 with a cuff she bought me from the pharmacy, who said, the way other grandmothers say you'll make someone a fine wife, you are going to be a wonderful doctor, and you are going to be the kind who listens. She is the reason I am what I am. It is not lost on me, and it has never stopped being bitter, that the months I spent honoring her were the exact months my sister used to bury me. So when Marisa told them I had failed, they did not resist it. They reached for it. A version of events in which the favorite was secretly the protector, and the overlooked one was secretly the failure was not a tragedy to my parents. On some level, beneath the level where people admit things to themselves, it was a relief. It restored the order they were comfortable in. It made the world make sense again. The daughter who was not supposed to outshine the other one had been put back in her place by reality itself, and Marisa, generous Marisa, was even willing to take care of her. They did not check the story because checking the story risked breaking a thing they preferred unbroken. I did not fight it the way I should have. I have spent years deciding whether that was dignity or cowardice, and I have landed somewhere in the middle, which is usually where the truth about yourself lives. I found out about the lie secondhand from a cousin weeks after Grandma Joan's funeral, and my first feeling was not rage. It was a tired kind of disbelief, the specific exhaustion of realizing that the people who were supposed to know you best had reached for the worst available explanation and held it like a gift. I thought, they will see. I thought, I will go back. I will finish. I will graduate. And the truth will defend itself. I was 26 years old, and I genuinely believed that the truth was the kind of thing that defended itself, that facts had their own gravity and would eventually pull everyone back to reality. They do not. Facts do not defend themselves. People defend the stories they have already decided to believe, and they will spend astonishing amounts of energy maintaining a comfortable lie over an uncomfortable truth, and the more they have invested in the lie, the harder they will fight for it. My parents had invested in Marisa for 30 years. They were not going to dig up that investment to rescue the daughter they had always treated as the spare. The confrontation came at Christmas of 2019. I had gone back to school, I was finishing, I was months from graduating, and I went home for the holiday because I still, even then, wanted them. I walked into the kitchen, and my father would not look at me, and my mother said, without preamble, that they thought it would be best if I stopped pretending. Those were her words. Stop pretending. She said it would be healthier for everyone if I just admitted what had happened and let the family help me instead of, and here she actually used the word, performing. I could have produced proof. I want you to understand that I had it, that it would have been easy, that I could have driven to a computer and printed my enrollment, my grades, my graduation date, the whole paper trail of a life that was demonstrably on track. I stood in that kitchen and I felt the proof sitting in my pocket like a stone, and I made a decision that I have examined 1,000 times since. I decided I was not going to do it. I decided that if my own mother would believe my sister's invention over my standing in front of her, then no document was going to fix what was actually broken, which was not a question of fact, but a question of who they had decided to love. A diploma cannot make someone choose you. I had finally understood that, standing by the refrigerator with the Christmas lights blinking in the next room. If you'll believe her over me, I said, then believe her. I'm not going to spend my life auditioning. My father spoke then, for the first and almost the last time. Then maybe you shouldn't come around until you're ready to be honest. I left that night. I did not slam anything. I drove 8 hours back through the dark to the apartment where Adam, who was not yet my husband, was waiting up, and I sat on the floor of our kitchen, and he sat on the floor next to me and did not say anything wise, just stayed. And that was the night the family ended and the marriage began, in the same 8 hours. For 5 years, there was nothing. No calls, no cards, except the one I sent that came back unopened. I graduated, and they were not there. I married, and they were not there. I became the kind of doctor that people are glad to find on the worst night of their lives. And they did not know, because they had decided they already knew, and the thing they thought they knew was a lie my sister told to keep her own failure in the dark. And then on a Tuesday in May, a car left the interstate at 70 miles an hour, and the worst night of my sister's life had me written at the top of the chart. I handed Maurice off to Ruth Okafor and the surgical team, and then there was the part of the job that has nothing to do with medicine, which is the family. Somebody has to talk to the family. On any other night, it would have been routine, the conversation I have 100 times a year, calm and clear and kind. That night, the family was my family, and they were sitting in the consult room off the main corridor, and a clerk had taken down the attending's name for the consent paperwork and read it back to them out loud. I know she read it out loud because Bridget told me afterward, with the particular grim relish of a charge nurse who has seen everything. The clerk had said, "Dr. Keene is leading her care. She'll come and speak with you." And my mother had sat down very slowly into the plastic chair, the way you sit down when your knees have stopped consulting you about it. Keene, my married name, the name on my badge, the name the whole hospital knew me by, a name my parents had never heard because they had not been at the wedding where I took it. For 5 years I had been in their minds, Nora Brandt, the dropout, the one who failed and lied. The woman keeping Marisa alive was Dr. Keene, and for a few minutes they did not connect the two, and then I walked into the consult room and they had to. I had updated Frightened Families 10,000 times. I knew exactly how to do it. I sat down across from them, at the right distance, and I told them about my sister's spleen in clean clinical language, the rupture, the blood she had lost, the surgery that was happening upstairs at that moment, the reasons for cautious optimism, and the reasons we could not promise anything yet. I kept my voice level and my words plain. I did the thing I am good at. My mother's first complete sentence after all of it, after 5 years, was not, "I'm sorry." It was not, "We were wrong." She looked at me across that small room, and what she said was, "You won't make this strange in front of people, will you?" I have turned that sentence over so many times. In its way, it told me everything I needed to know about whether anything had changed. Faced with the collapse of the entire story she had organized her family around, my mother's first instinct was management. Do not make this strange. Do not embarrass us. Be the daughter who smooths the room, the role I had played my whole childhood, the one who reads the temperature of the adults and makes herself small enough to keep the peace. Her daughter was bleeding upstairs, and her other daughter was the surgeon's equal, who had just kept her alive. And the thing she reached for was decorum. "Marisa lost a lot of blood," I said. "Dr. Okafor is repairing the source now. I'll know more in an hour." My father tried a different door, which was almost worse. "We always knew you'd land somewhere," he said, and he even smiled a little when he said it, a terrible, hopeful smile, as though 5 years were a gap in correspondence, as though the wall had been weather and not a decision. "We always knew you'd land somewhere," as if they had been quietly confident in me the whole time, as if the returned card and the empty chairs had been some kind of misunderstanding that we could all chuckle about now. I felt, in that consult room, the oldest pull in my body, the pull to make it easy for them, to say of course, to say it's fine, to say let's not dwell, to pick up the dropped thing and tidy it away so the grown-ups would not have to feel the weight of what they had done. I had been doing that since I was 6 years old. It would have been the most natural motion in the world. I did not do it, but I did not punish them either, and the not punishing was its own discipline. I simply declined to pretend. I told them what was true about Marisa's condition and nothing about the past, and when my mother asked her question about not making things strange, I answered only about the spleen, and the not answering was an answer, and she heard it. "I have other patients," I said, standing. "Someone will come find you when she's out of surgery." I walked back out onto the floor, and I leaned against the medication cabinet for a moment with my eyes closed, and then I went and saw a man with chest pain, and a teenager who had broken her wrist skateboarding, and a grandmother with pneumonia, because the department does not stop being a department just because your life is happening in one of its rooms. In the locker alcove around 3 a.m, I called Adam. He picked up on the second ring, because he always sleeps with the phone on when I am on nights in case. "It's Marisa," I said. "She's here. She was in a wreck. I'm her doctor." There was a silence, and then Adam said the thing I needed, which was not advice. "Okay," he said. "I'm here. What do you need?" "I don't know," I said. "I think I need you to tell me I don't have to figure out the rest of it tonight." "You don't have to figure out the rest of it tonight," he said. "Do the work. Keep her alive if you can. Then come home. The family stuff can wait. It's waited 5 years. It can wait until morning." He was right that I did not have to decide it all that night. He was wrong, though I did not correct him, that I had not already decided it. I think I had decided it somewhere around the moment my mother asked me not to make things strange. I just had not said it to myself in words yet. Here is the decision, in words. I was going to be Maurice's physician all the way to the end of my responsibility, flawlessly, because that is who I am, and because she was a patient, and patients get my whole competence regardless of their last name. And I was not going to trade that care for readmission into a family that had only opened the door because someone was dying. Those were two separate things. The first was an obligation, and the second was a temptation, and I was going to honor the first and refuse the second, and I was not, ever again, going to audition for people who had already seen the performance of my entire life and given it a failing grade out of preference. I went up to the surgical floor around 4 to check on the case, not as family, but as the referring physician, which is a real role and gave me a real reason to stand at the board and read the updates. Ruth Okafor came out of the operating room peeling off her gown, and she found me there. "Splenectomy," she said. She had a grade 4 laceration. She was nearly exsanguinated when she hit my table. "She's going to make it. She's going to make it because you bought us the time downstairs. 4 more minutes and we'd have lost her in the elevator." She looked at me for a moment with the frank attention of one professional sizing up another. "That was clean work, Nora. Whatever's going on with that family in the waiting room, and the nurses tell me something's going on. The work you did tonight was clean." I had spent years learning to keep people alive, standing at that board, watching my sister's vital signs hold steady on a monitor because of the order I had done things in a few hours before. I understood that I had finally also learned to keep myself, which is a harder thing and which no residency teaches. Marisa woke up in the late morning in a recovery room with a window, and I was not going to be there for it, because there was no medical reason for me to be, and a great many reasons not to be. But Ruth had asked me to look at a post-operative question on another patient on that same floor, and so I was 20 feet away when my sister surfaced, and a nurse, not knowing the geography of my family, came and found me and said the patient in Bay 4 was asking for Dr. Keene by name. I went in. My parents were already there, on either side of the bed. Marissa's eyes were open and wet and frightened in the way people are frightened after they have been close enough to death to feel its actual temperature. She saw my badge first, I think, before she saw my face. Dr. Keene. And then she saw my face, and she saw that I was calm, and that I was not there to collect anything, and something in her broke open in a way that no surgery had touched. "You never dropped out," she said. Her voice was a wreck from the breathing tube. "I told them you did. I knew you didn't. I always knew you didn't." I had imagined that sentence for 5 years. I want to be honest with you about what it was like to finally hear it, because the honest version is not the satisfying one. I felt no triumph. There was no warmth that rushed in to fill the years. What I felt mostly was how cheap it had been. My entire exile, the chairs, the card, the wall, all of it had been bought with a sentence, and the sentence had been a lie my sister told to keep her own failure in the dark, and she had always known it was a lie. She had just decided her comfort was worth more than my place in the family. Hearing her say it did not give me anything back. It only showed me the price tag, and the price tag was obscene. My mother made a sound. My father said my sister's name, low, like a warning, the reflex of a man who has spent his whole life trying to stop information from reaching the people it would upset. But it was out now. It was in the room, and a room is a hard place to put a thing like that back. I watched my parents receive it. That is the part I will not forget, more than the confession itself. I watched my mother's face do the thing a face does when it is forced to hold two pictures that cannot both be true, the dropout and the doctor, the failure, and the woman who runs the trauma bay, and watched the second picture win because the second picture was standing in front of her in a white coat with the monitor at her back showing the steady rhythm she had bought. I watched my father look at the floor because my father has always looked at the floor when the bill comes due. They had skipped my wedding. They had returned my card. They had told relatives for 5 years a version of me that was a lie, and now the author of the lie was lying in a hospital bed, taking it back with a voice wrecked by a breathing tube, and there was nowhere in that small room for any of them to hide from the size of it. Marisa kept going, because people who have nearly died often cannot stop once they start. "I was failing and you were not," she said to me, but loud enough for them. I couldn't stand it. So I said you were the one who failed. And they wanted to believe it, so they did, and then it was just true. It was just how everybody talked, and I didn't know how to take it back, and the longer I waited, the more it would have cost me to say it, so I never said it. She was crying now, the ugly, exhausted crying of someone with stitches in her abdomen. "I almost died, and the person who saved me was you. And I couldn't let you fix me without you knowing that I knew. I always knew. It would be a lie to tell you I felt nothing. I felt a great deal. But none of it was the thing I had expected, which was relief or vindication or the warm collapse of an old grief finally being witnessed. What I felt, standing there, was a kind of vertigo at how ordinary the machinery of my exile had been. Not a grand villainy, a frightened woman who could not bear a comparison, and two parents who preferred a comfortable lie to an uncomfortable phone call. That was all it had taken. That was the entire mechanism that had cost me my family for 5 years. It was so small. The smallness of it was the worst part. I did not say any of the things I had rehearsed in 4 years of unwanted 2 in the morning rehearsals. I did not say I told you so, because I had not told them. I had refused to. That was the whole point. I did not make a speech. I reached over and I adjusted the rate on her intravenous line because it had drifted, and I checked the number on the monitor, and I stayed, for that moment, exactly what I was, which was the doctor. "Rest," I said. "You came very close. The team did good work. Don't talk more than you have to." And then I left, because my shift had technically ended an hour before, and because there was nothing in that room for me to collect. The aftermath moved through them the way water moves through a house, finding every low place. I heard about most of it secondhand from the cousin who had told me about the lie in the first place, who has functioned my whole life as a kind of unwilling courier of family weather. My father, she said, had tried the reframe almost immediately, in the corridor, to anyone who would listen, and to me directly when he caught me at the elevator that afternoon. "We were all misled," he said. "Your sister wasn't well, clearly, and we all believed something we shouldn't have. And the important thing now is that we can put it behind us, as a family. We, as if the wall had built itself, as if no one had chosen the brick, lifted it, set it in place, and skipped a wedding to stand behind it. We were all misled," is the sentence of a man who cannot survive being the subject of an active verb. They were not misled. They chose. They chose the easy daughter in the comfortable story, and when the comfortable story required them to treat their other daughter as a liar for 5 years, they did that, willingly, and "we were misled" was an attempt to launder a decision into an accident. "You weren't misled," I said to him at the elevator, and I kept my voice as level as I keep it for the families of the dying, because in a way that is what they were. "You were told something convenient and you never once checked. I was 8 hours away, not on the moon. You had my number the entire time. You chose not to use it." He did not have an answer for that. There is not one. My mother, in the days after, was quieter. The cousin told me she had noticed the bruises on my father's arm, the 4 small marks her own fingers had left in the trauma bay, and that she had stared at them for a long time without saying anything. And I think those bruises were the only language available to her for what she felt, the only honest mark in a family that had spent 30 years making sure nothing ever left a mark. She had gripped him in terror because the dropout, the fraud, the failure was the one person standing between her favorite child and death. And the whole architecture of her certainty had come down in a single second, and she had nowhere to put the weight of it except into my father's forearm. I saw her once more before I left the hospital that week. She caught me in the parking structure, by my car, having clearly waited, and she did not try the reframe, to her small credit. She said, "I didn't know." And I believed that she believed it. But not knowing is not the defense she wanted it to be, and I told her so, as gently as the truth allowed. "You didn't know," I said, "because you decided not to find out. That's not the same as being innocent. There's an empty chair somewhere in a storage closet at my friend's house from my wedding. There's a card you sent back without opening it. Knowing why you weren't there doesn't put you there. It can't. That time is just gone." She cried then, and I did not comfort her, which was one of the hardest things I have ever made myself not do, because the reflex to comfort my crying mother is older than almost anything in me. But comforting her would have been picking the dropped thing up again, tidying it away, making myself small so the adult would not have to feel the weight. And I was done doing that. I let her feel the weight. It was hers to feel. Some weights you do a person no kindness by carrying for them. I drove out of that parking structure with my hands very calm on the wheel and a strange hollowness in my chest. And I want to be precise about that hollowness because I think it is the part people most need to hear. I had assumed for years that the day the truth came out would feel like an arrival. I had pictured it as a door I would finally walk through into something warmer on the other side. What I found instead was that the door opened onto a room I had already left. By the time they learned who I really was, I no longer needed them to know it. The need had quietly died somewhere in the years of building, and I had not noticed it dying. The way you do not notice the exact day a long fever breaks, only that one morning you wake up and the heat is gone and the bed is just a bed again. Their knowledge arrived too late to be a gift. It arrived as information, and information about a thing you have already made your peace with does not heal you. It just updates a file you had stopped opening. There is a particular grief in that, and I do not want to pretend it away. Part of me had hoped, against everything I knew about my family, that the truth coming out would also bring back the people, that my mother would not just learn I was a doctor, but would somehow become the mother who would have wanted to be at the graduation, that my father would turn into a man capable of an active verb. But people do not transform because the facts change. The facts had always been on my side. It was never a shortage of facts that kept them away. It was a shortage of the thing facts cannot supply, which is the willingness to love someone even when loving them costs you the comfortable story. That willingness was not in them 5 years ago, and a near death in the family did not manufacture it overnight. What the accident gave them was knowledge and shame. It did not give them character. Those are not the same, and I have had to grieve the difference, which is its own small funeral, held alone, for a version of my parents who never actually existed, except in my hoping. So I counted the price honestly, because I am a person who would rather know the real number than a comfortable estimate. I had been proven right. That was worth something. It went into the ledger on the positive side, next to my marriage and my work and the steadiness I had earned. And on the other side of the ledger went the years, the milestones witnessed by friends and strangers and colleagues instead of family, the particular ache of scanning a graduation crowd and finding no one of your blood in it, the wedding chairs, the returned card, and the simple fact that I will go to my own grave as a woman whose parents, when handed a choice between believing her and believing a convenient lie, chose the lie and held it for 5 years. You do not get that back. The truth coming out does not refund it. Being right is real, and being right is cold, and anyone who tells you that vindication is warm has never actually been vindicated. It does not warm the chairs that stayed empty. It only tells you, at last, the exact dimensions of what you lost. I want to tell you that being right felt like something. People assume it must. They imagine the moment the truth comes out as a kind of justice with a temperature, a warmth that arrives to compensate you for the cold years. It is not like that. Vindication is a colder thing than people imagine. It does not warm the chairs that stayed empty. It does not unmail the card. It does not give me back the version of myself at my own graduation, scanning a crowd of other people's families and feeling the particular loneliness of accomplishment with no one in your row. The truth coming out fixed the record. It did not fix the years, because the years are not the kind of thing that gets fixed. They are the kind of thing you carry, lighter or heavier, depending on the day, for the rest of your life. I drove home at dawn after that week, after Marisa was stable and transferred to the floor and out of any danger that required me, and Adam met me at the door the way he always does, and he put his arms around me in the doorway, and I finally, after holding it for a week, came apart a little, quietly, the way I do everything. "You did the hardest thing twice," he said, into my hair. "You saved her, and you didn't lose yourself doing it. Most people only manage one of those." I weighed it all in the days after, in the honest way I try to weigh things. I had been proven right. That was real, and it mattered, and I would not pretend otherwise. But being proven right and being made whole are two different transactions, and only one of them had happened in that hospital. The other one, the wholeness, had been my own slow work over 5 years, in rooms my family never entered, and it was nearly finished long before Marissa's car left the road. The trauma bay did not heal me. I had mostly healed myself already. The trauma bay just informed the people who hurt me of a fact I had stopped needing them to know. The relationships landed where they landed, and not where it would have been comfortable for them to land. With Marissa, it was an ending. She asked me, on the day she was discharged, leaning on my mother's arm by the patient pickup doors, whether we could start over. She asked it with real hope, I think, the hope of someone who has nearly died and wants the nearly dying to have purchased her a clean slate. "Can we start over?" she said. "I'm glad you lived," I told her, and I meant it completely. There was no cruelty in it. "That's the whole of what I have for you. I'm glad you lived." It was not a door slammed. It was a door closed, which is a different thing. Quieter and more final. You slam a door in anger, and the anger implies the door could open again. I closed it the way you close the door of a house you are moving out of, with your hands full, without looking back, because there is nothing left inside that belongs to you. I signed off her chart that day as the referring physician, and I have not spoken to my sister since. With my parents, it was different, and I have had to make my peace with the fact that it is messier than a clean story would prefer. I did not cut them off the way they cut me off. I am not built for symmetry that neat, and I did not want to spend the next 5 years being the thing I had hated being on the other side of. I left the door open by an inch. My mother writes, occasionally, careful short letters that do not ask for anything, which I think is her version of learning. I answer some of them. My father called once and I picked up and we spoke for 11 minutes about nothing, about the weather, about a road they were repaving near the house, and it was awkward and small and it did not heal anything and it was also not nothing. But an inch is an inch. I did not slam the door. I also did not furnish the room behind it. They can knock. They cannot move back in. There is a difference between forgiveness and amnesia, and the family I came from has always wanted the second one, has always wanted to skip straight to, let's put it behind us, without passing through the part where someone holds what they did long enough to be changed by it. I will not give them the amnesia. If they want a relationship with me now, it will be a small, true, slow thing, built on who I actually am, and it will be built at my pace, and the first time it asks me to make myself small again, it ends. I think they understand that. I think for the first time, the understanding is real, because they have seen, with their own eyes, in a room where it could not be spun, exactly what they threw away. The life widened after. That is the part I hold on to. The summer after Marissa's accident, Adam and I finally took the trip we had been putting off for years, the one we kept not taking because residency and then attending nights had eaten every spare week. We drove to the coast, just the two of us, with no plan more specific than the direction, and we stayed in small towns and ate at counters and slept late. And somewhere on the second day, with the window down and the ocean coming up on the right, I realized that the verdict I had carried for so long had finally gone weightless. Not gone. Weightless. It was still there, the fact of what my family had decided about me, but it had stopped having mass. It could no longer pull me out of my own orbit. They had been so certain. And in the end, their certainty had turned out to be the least important fact in the entire story. Less important than my hands, less important than the order I did things in, less important than the man in the driver's seat who had believed me on the floor of a kitchen years before anyone made him. We stopped that second afternoon at a turnout above a long gray beach, and we sat on the hood of the car and ate sandwiches out of paper and did not talk much. And I thought about how I would explain all of this to someone if they asked me what I had learned. I think what I had learned is that there are two different projects that get confused for each other, and confusing them will cost you years if you let it. The first project is being proven right. The second project is being free. They feel like the same project when you are inside the hurt, because the hurt tells you that the day everyone finally sees the truth will be the day you are finally free. But they are not the same project at all. Being proven right depends entirely on other people. It requires them to look, to admit, to change their story, and you cannot make them do any of those things. So if you tie your freedom to their admission, you have handed the key to the very people who locked the door. Being free does not require them at all. It only requires you to stop waiting. I had spent 2 or 3 years tangled up in the first project, driving the 8 hours home with the proof in my pocket, and I had spent the next 2 or 3 quietly switching to the second one without quite realizing I had switched. And by the time the trauma bay handed me the first project on a silver tray, I had already finished the second one on my own. That is the only reason the night did not destroy me. I had stopped needing it to go a certain way. My sister and I are finished, and I have made my peace with that being a closed thing rather than an open wound. On the day she was discharged, she stood at the patient pickup doors, leaning on our mother's arm, smaller than I remembered her, and she looked at me with the open hope of someone who believes a brush with death has bought her a clean slate, and she asked if we could start over. I told her I was glad she lived, and I meant every word of it, and I told her that was the whole of what I had for her, and I meant that too. Some doors you close not in anger, but because the room behind them is empty and you have nothing left to store there. With my parents, I left a single inch of light. My mother sends short, careful letters now, and I read them, and I answer perhaps 1 in 3, and the answers are honest and brief and promise nothing. My father called once, and we talked for 11 minutes about a road they were repaving, and it healed nothing, and it was also not nothing, and I have decided to let it be exactly the small, uncertain thing it is, instead of forcing it to be either a reconciliation or a war. Not everything has to resolve. Some relationships just become quiet, and you let them, and you keep your hand near the door. I went back to work the next week. I am still there. I still take the overnight shifts that nobody wants because the worst hour of the night is when people most need someone steady. And steady is the thing I turned out to be, no matter what the people who raised me decided I was. Some nights the doors bang open and a gurney comes through them like a thing thrown, and I meet the body first because the body does not lie and the body does not care who you are, and I do the work, and the work is clean. I want to say one thing to you before I go. If you are someone who has lived a version of this, if someone you love decided who you were and never bothered to check, then you already know the loneliest part of it, and it is not their certainty. Their certainty you can survive. The loneliest part is how long you keep volunteering to be re-examined, how many times you drive the 8 hours home with the proof in your pocket, hoping that this will be the year they finally look at the evidence of you. How much of your one life you can spend in a courtroom that was never going to acquit you, because the verdict was never actually about the facts. So here is the only thing I know for certain, after all of it. You do not have to win the case. You have to stop showing up to the trial. You do not owe anyone the performance of your own innocence. Put the proof back in your pocket, walk out of the courtroom, and go build the life. Build it true, and build it where they cannot see it, if that is what it takes. And let the truth find its own way to the door in its own time, or never. Your wholeness was never going to be issued to you by the people who broke it. It is yours to build, in rooms they are not in, with your own 2 hands. And if the day ever comes when the truth does arrive, when the people who decided who you were are finally made to see who you actually became, do not be surprised if it lands quieter than you imagined. Do not be surprised if you feel less triumph than you expected and more tenderness for the younger version of you who waited so long for this exact moment. That tenderness is not weakness. It is the proof that you survived with your heart intact, which is the only victory that was ever actually available. The people who hurt you do not get to decide whether you came through it whole. You do. You always did. They just had you convinced for a while that the verdict was theirs to issue. Mine turned out to be steady. I hope yours are too. Take care of yourself and be gentle with the version of you that still wanted them. I'll see you in the next one.